Here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts. Hey, Pete, ever wonder what Steven Spielberg's favorite film is?
You know, Andy, I've heard he loves classics like Lawrence of Arabia, Meet Me in St. Louis.
Imagine chatting with him about why those films resonate with him so much.
That's exactly what we do on our podcast, Movies We Like. We've had incredible guests like actress Dee Wallace, cinematographer Eric Messerschmidt, director Steve Miner, and former Disney animators Tom and Tony Bancroft.
They share their favorite films and the impact they've had on their careers, offering fascinating insights into the craftsmanship and storytelling techniques that make these movies so special.
If you're curious about the magic behind the scenes, subscribe to Movies We Like from True Story FM on your favorite podcast app. New episodes are released on the fourth Monday of each month with early access for our members.
Join us on Movies We Like as we explore the movies we all like with the people who make them.
And Stephen, our people will call your people. Let's make this happen, puppy.
Subscribe today.
I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Andy Nelson.
Welcome to the next reel. When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Johnny got his gun is over. I'm the boss. This the champagne. Merry Christmas.
I wish they'd get this stuff off my face so I can see what they're doing. They sew you up, and then it heals, and then they take the stitches out.
War has various meanings to various persons.
I don't know how long I've been here. I don't know what year I'm in.
Gonna make the world safe for democracy, aren't you?
What's he saying?
He says, kill me. Over and over again. Kill me.
I'll pray for him for the rest of my days. But I will not risk testing his faith against your stupidity. He's the product of your profession, not mine.
Okay, Andy, Johnny got his gun. Was this a you pick or a me pick?
This is me. This is part of my one and done series of filmmakers who they basically made one feature film in their careers. And this was Dalton Trumbo, who, you know, has been somebody who's known in Hollywood, certainly had a lot of other projects that he had been a part of as a screenwriter. You know, 74 credits as screenwriter on IMDb. And also was a person who was blacklisted for a period, one of the Hollywood 10. But what's interesting for me is Trumbo as a writer who had written this novel a while before and then adapting this himself to make it into this film in the 70s, post-Vietnam, was just an interesting thing. So yeah, it was one that I definitely wanted to include on this one and done list.
And you had not seen it?
I had not seen this.
Did you know what it was about before you watched it?
Yeah, I knew the whole gist of it. And actually...
You'd read the book, right?
I only just read the book. So I recently read it just so I had a sense of it before our conversation here.
Okay. So I'm doing all this. The reason I'm interrogating you like I am is because the other thing that I know you know about me is how much I hated my experience of watching The Diving Bell and the Butterfly for the show. And I needed to know if I could blame you for intentionally putting me through that level of anxiety again. You asshat.
Yes, another trapped in type of story. Yeah,
oh my God. And I should say, I actually loved The Diving Bell, the Butterfly. I will never watch it again. Same thing with this. There is a lot of really interesting stuff going on in this movie. And I'm curious to further explore the experience of the book, because it feels like a movie that they would have had to make some rather extraordinary changes to make it cinematic. But my experience with it, with Timothy Boom Boom Bottoms and Jason Robards and Donald Sutherland, I thought it was fascinating, the experience for this movie that I probably will never watch again.
Yeah. I guess speaking about the comparisons first between the book and the movie, it's definitely, when you read the book, which, he wrote in 1939, so much earlier, before World War II, as a direct kind of look back at World War I and the horrors that you would see in a war like that. And he had actually heard a few stories about some soldiers like this, one of which was I think it was a somewhat famous one named Curly Christian, who Edward, Prince of Wales, came and visited in the hospital. He was the first and only Canadian soldier who was a quadruple amputee. Then the second story he heard was about a British major whose body was so damaged so horrifically that they just reported him MIA to his family, which is like
Oh my God.
horrifying. Yeah. And then, of course, the family discovered the truth years later. Trumbo had heard these stories and wanted to write a book about kind of this tragedy. And so the book is very internal. Like, we're never external. In the film, obviously, we as the viewers are in the room with the nurse, with the doctors, with all of these other people seeing what's going on. So there's no way for Trumbo to kind of keep that completely internal. Whereas in the book, like, we're listening to the footsteps as he's counting. How many footsteps is he hearing? These are heavier footsteps. Okay, so it's a different person who's come in now. And so there's very much a different play on those internal monologues that he's having. And likewise, we're getting mostly a lot of internal monologues and then a lot of flashbacks to his life. Like, we spend a lot more time with him. In fact, very little time actually in the trenches. Most of our time is spent with his family, with Kareen, with kind of like the whole thing with the fishing trip. We have all of that sort of stuff. We also have a lot more time where he ends up working at that bakery. We've only got that little bit at the bakery, which you reference kind of briefly in your opening line here. That's more of a dream sequence here, but we see a lot of time that he spends in the bakery and getting to know some of the people there, and it just plays differently, and it has to. That's kind of the nature of it. And I think the translation and the time juxtaposition, Trumbo wrote it after World War I. Here he is making the film version of it after Vietnam, although it still is set in World War I. He's able to tap into more of the elements of how people are feeling post-Vietnam. And a lot of the stuff is the same, but bringing in the Christ figure played by Donald Sutherland and a lot of the dream sequences, that particularly where his father is involved, I think that he's just creating those things to bring more visual to the story that we didn't have when we read it as a book.
Well, and that stuff worked for me sublimely, right? Like, I thought, I actually was relieved when we started getting those flashbacks and those experiences where we get to see him second person or third person, because had it been another completely locked in experience, that would have been challenging, right? That's hard. I think Diving Bell and the Butterfly does a thing that's pretty special, and I couldn't figure out how they were going to be able to do this with this movie at this time. The experience of the film, right? The fact that this is both an anti-war movie, but also very much a sort of disabled rights movie, right? It's the struggle for autonomy in a culture that does not fight for that autonomy on your behalf anymore is as much a critical part of this story as is the war piece, right? The fact that the war was the agent of change for him is secondary to the fact that he is thrust into a system that only cares for him as a science experiment, with the exception of a couple of caring nurses. And I thought that was, heartbreaking. I thought, like, the end of this movie, I thought they were going to give me some hope, and they gave me no hope. Like, just grief.
Same ending for the book as well. Like, it's just a gut punch of an ending, no matter how you slice it. For some reason, I thought that I had read somewhere that the ending of the film, they had changed it in some capacity, but when I saw it, I'm like, oh nope, I guess it's the same bleak ending. Although there is one difference, which I guess I could just spoil right now for you, but in the book, you don't have the moment where the nurse tries to euthanize him. It's just, you get the military medical leader there saying, nope, we're just going to leave you here. And that's kind of it. And then you just have his internal monologue as he's upset.
Well, part of the reason that that's so hard is because of the way the story unveils the fact that even though the guy has lost both arms and both legs and most of his face,
Yeah. Eyes, nose, mouth, ears, jaw.
he can't hear, he can't see, he's covered in the movie. His face is covered the entire time. But the movie really elegantly unveils the fact that he can sense, right? He is the World War I daredevil. Like he sort of can see by way of vibrations and temperature because his skin is still intact, right? He still has the skin by which he can sense heat and temperature and by way of temperature, light. The casual disregard of that conflict between him not being able to communicate for most of the movie and other people just saying over and over, don't worry, he can't tell, turn the lights off, put him in a utility closet with no windows, keep everything barred, like he can't tell. While he can tell is, I think, really well done and elicits the kind of emotional, like just that sadness in me as an audience member throughout, and is a perfect setup for that grief-stricken ending.
It plays very hauntingly, and it's interesting because obviously there have been changes in the medical industry as to how to approach people like this. And, this story is set in the 19 teens, somewhere in there. And this is a period where they were still learning and figuring things out. And this one doctor just kind of assumes that he's been, I can't remember what he said, but basically a separation of his medulla oblongata is kind of what it sounds like. And which means that he's basically a vegetable, and let's just now use him as something we can study and see what happens without actually really doing any tests to figure anything out. Like, he does nothing to explore that, right? He just makes these assumptions and everybody just goes along with it because he's the head guy. I think now, by the time you get to something like Diving Bell and the Butterfly, they're actively trying to figure out, can you actually use anything to communicate with us? And I think that was the critical thing, that it finally took this nurse to figure out that, one, he can sense on his skin. I'm going to write a letter on his chest and see if he can figure it out. And he is able to, and figures out that he's writing a message to her, or she's writing a message to him. And then he comes up with the idea of using, moving his head and speaking in Morse code. And that is, it's just fascinating, and it's horrifying, to your point, that it took them that long, who knows, years though, to get to a point where somebody was figuring out he is conscious and he is communicating with us and he doesn't want to be like this. It's a revelation when they finally get those messages and are able to figure it out. But it's also, as you said, it's horrifying. But that's the thing. It's like, it's a powerful message that I think it speaks to how some people in some of these communities, especially as it evolves, are closed off to, if it doesn't look like a man anymore, well, then it's not going to be able to be, a man in any capacity. We can use it for experiments and such.
So what do you think of our principal, Joe Bonham, Timothy Bottoms? What do you think of him? Young man, taking on a tough role. Tough role
for sure. I like Timothy Bottoms. He was great. I mostly think I know him from The Last Picture Show, which is, this was his very first film. That's his second film. And I love him in both of these films. Like, I think that he captures the youthful innocence of somebody who's just ready to serve his country and go off to war, and that eager-eyed look that he has before he heads there. And while we don't necessarily get to ever see his facial reactions or anything after the fact, he's as you said, he's always covered up. But in the voiceover in his head, just the way that he's reading his lines, I think really is carrying that. And I think it works exceptionally. So I loved him in the film. I thought he was a perfect choice to carry this.
Me too. I did have a moment of just sort of thought experiment. What would it be like if during the black and white sequence, the black and white was used to signify we're in the present, and all of the flashbacks were in color.
Flashbacks and dreams.
Yeah, right. What would it have been like if when we were in the present, we didn't have the voiceover? We only had his physicality. Can you imagine?
I just don't think it would play. Well, one, I don't think it's giving us the adaptation of the book necessarily, because the book is
There's
internal.
so much in his head.
It's an internal journey in the book.
Yeah.
If we don't have that, then it's not a story about him anymore. It really kind of becomes a story about the medical team trying to figure out what they're doing, And I just don't think that would play. I can't see it working.
Especially early, it wouldn't. But those sequences at the end when she's finally discovering writing Merry Christmas and you get his head moving with such enthusiasm, like those moments of discovering that he can communicate without him telling me he can communicate, I think would be very powerful, right? Like that's an example of a sequence where the actor gets to just act and see if he can tell that same story with his head and neck. I thought that would be an interesting, again, thought experiment. I mean, I think you're right, especially early on before he can move, and we still get a sense of his inner voice that's very powerful. I think that the thing that stands out for me with Timothy Bottoms is the youthful patriotism. I have to go and fight. Like, you have a beautiful young woman standing naked in the bedroom saying, "Please don't go, run away, I'll hide you." I have a hard time imagining how to say no to that.
Well, and I think that speaks to this mentality that the patriotism within our country, not just our country, but many countries, and also likewise parents who also had served, that they inspire in their kids to want to go and serve their country, do their part. His dad says that when he's a little kid here in the film. He says, why does it have to be the young men? Why don't the old men go do it? And, he's got that conversation. And then he's asking his dad, like, why do you have to do it? He's like, it's democracy. We've got to support the system. That's what it's all about.
He has that great line, "Young men don't have homes. That's why they have to go out and kill each other."
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so I think that's the element of the story here is like, he as a kid it didn't make any sense to him. He didn't want to do it. But somewhere between that conversation with his dad and then by the time he's actually of age and there's an actual war happening, like, that message obviously has kind of gotten drilled into him enough from his dad, from community, from society, from just the country, that it's what he does. It's what he needs to do. He wants to go. He wants to be part of this. And I think that's an interesting element, especially, again, coming after Vietnam when, we had lost so many people there as well. And it was obviously such a war that was very conflicted anyway. I think that telling this story at this point just kind of speaks to the way that we're treating our youth and selling them on this idea that they need to go put their lives on the line in service of our country. So all of these old people who are playing rulers can use them as pawns, basically.
Well, and there is a lovely exchange. It's sort of a setup payoff between Jason Robards, his dad, and him. In that sequence you were talking about before, he says, "Do you like the fishing pole more than me?" And he says, "Well, the fishing pole, because you're a kid, you're nothing yet. Like, hopefully you go make something of yourself and I'll like you more than the fishing pole." And then the payoff of that sequence is, he's a young man, he's about to go off to war and he's gone camping with his dad and his buddy, and he loses this famed fishing pole, and his dad kind of snuggles up behind him as he's just terrified to tell his father that he's lost the pole. And his father says, "Let's not let a fishing pole spoil our last trip together." And that's an incredibly powerful exchange, especially the intimacy these two guys have in that tent as they kind of father-son, he holds his now adult son as he should, as a father. And that meant a lot in the movie. Like, that was a beautiful sequence.
Yeah, and I don't like. There's a lot of time spent talking about that fishing pole and how, and his dad mentioned some of the stuff like he was never a person who could figure out how to make money well. Like he always was working, but always was struggling. And that fishing pole was like the most expensive thing that he ever had bought. And his son knew he was never going to have enough money to buy another one. And that's part of the reason why it's just such a heartbreak for him that he loses it. And it played well in the film. And that resolution was incredibly powerful. Jason Robards, I mean, we've talked so much about him in many films that we've discussed on the show, on a variety of our shows, and quite a number in this particular period. I mean, recently we just did a Boy and His Dog. We've talked about All the President's Men. Like Jason Robards in this kind of this early to mid 70s period, I think is just fantastic. And bringing this character to life as this father who plays him kind of as a gruff father, but in his heart is just that pure parental love for his son. And it came across. It was really, really touching.
So then we have Donald Sutherland. Like so much of this movie, as much as it's about all the things we've talked about, is also about a man reckoning with end of life and his feelings about the great beyond. And Donald Sutherland comes in as Christ.
Which that was interesting because it's not like in the book, like he doesn't have any specific conversations with Jesus or God or anything like that. I mean, he's talking to them often, like praying, but this was a period where we're definitely in this dream sequence. A couple of times Christ pops in, but the big one is where he's like, I don't know, it looked like in the military field, but he's basically working as the carpenter, making crosses was kind of his thing. And of course, this was the period with Donald Sutherland where he looked like a hippie, so he had the perfect long hair to play this sort of role. It was an interesting addition that I couldn't quite decide if it worked for me. And this was something like some of the changes, like this scene, and likewise when he in his head he realizes, you know what I could do to make money? I could be a circus freak, basically, and I could join the circus and people could pay to come look at me, and that's how I could make my living. Like he sells himself on this idea, and that's what he pitches to them at the end. And the film portrays them in an interesting hallucinatory sort of way where I don't know if I completely bought into them as much as I wanted to, particularly the circus scene, because it's like we're out in a desert. It's just the circus, the little carnival show with some clowns and other carnival looking people all kind of crowding around and then kind of marching across the sands and stuff. It was very hippie, drug-induced dream sequence sort of dream. And so it didn't completely work for me. Christ worked a little better. What did you think? How did it play for you?
I'll take the circus first because I think you and I are in the same camp. It didn't entirely work for me. Generously, if I look at the initial portrayal of the circus as the setup for the payoff, which is, remember at the end, he doesn't fully tell them that he wants to be in the circus. He does that all in his head, but he can't SOS fast enough. So all he gets out is like, I want out, before they all around the room, keep talking about him. So they don't know he wants to sell himself to the circus. We know it, and that's part of the grief. Does it work for me? Not entirely, right? It just feels like such an aside, a shoe-in kind of a thing. What does work for me is the hallucinatory sequence when Christ and the other soldiers are sitting there talking about, they're about to get on the train to go to port, to go overseas, to go to war, and they're talking about the day they'll die. And so that experience of having Christ there and them reckoning about going off to war as just a means to end their lives and how much it's going to suck to have, I'm going to be buried in a trench cave in. Doesn't that suck? That's terrible. Like they're all talking about that stuff. That scene worked for me in a way that I was surprised. I thought that sequence was really great. The sequence with the crosses as Christ is manufacturing crosses was funny, sort of sadistically funny, because he's in a war zone. We know he's making crosses for all of the people who are carrying their own lives to the end. But the fact that Christ himself is written as a character who has no way to justify what Joe is going through was heartbreaking, right? That is such a statement on Trumbo's experience of faith. And how do you write a character like Joe who is completely absent as a vessel for hope? He's written a hopeless character. Even Jesus Christ could not come up with a message of hope. And that's hard.
No, and I think that's why the Jesus stuff works a little better for me than the circus. I think there's an interesting element there that plays. And I mean, and not to say like some of the other dream elements don't work. Like we've got Kareen showing up in some dreams. Like there's a point where it's kind of like some, I don't know, Greek architectural landscape with some temples and statues, and she's there. Same with his dad, who kind of keeps popping in. I mean, he's kind of the ringmaster at this carnival. There are those other elements, and I liked how people that he knew were showing up in his dreams, particularly Kareen. Like those elements I think were strong and they worked for me. It's just the way I think largely it's just the way the carnival is portrayed. But Jesus, I think I can buy into the one with Jesus that I think worked well for me. I think that plays better. And to your point, it's interesting hearing that message from Jesus himself, that, you know, there's no hope.
Yeah. You've made Jesus speechless.
Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah. And it's interesting. And going back to the mention that you had about, rights for disabled, I think that's definitely an interesting element of the story here, because we have, to your point, when he finally is able to kind of get his message out, he doesn't say, I want to, be in the circus. I want to be a freak for people to look at, but it's definitely like, take me out and show me to the people. And maybe my brain is like now confusing the message that we get at the end of the book versus the film, but it's definitely show the people. And in the book, I know he says, put me in a glass case. I want the people to see me. And I think the idea that he comes up with there is he wants people to understand what war does to you. And he wants people to see, this is what happens when you are going and fighting these wars. Like that's part of the very anti-war message that we have in the book. And, to your point, in the film, it's not quite as overt. And actually, interestingly, Roger Ebert in his review, he said, the way that Trumbo handled the material, strange to say, in a way that's not so much anti-war as pro-life. And I think, to your point, bringing up the idea of recognizing that somebody like this is still human and worth our attention and figuring out what they want and helping them get it, this is very much kind of this pro-life story when he's saying, I want to get out. I want to get out. Take me out. Let me out. And they say no. And I think that's the powerful element of this story that maybe shifts some of the anti-war stuff a little bit, as Ebert said.
I totally agree. And just hearing you say that, it makes me reflect on the fact that this movie doesn't give me that same sense of war is horrible. It's focusing so much on the individuals, the doctors that are making those decisions, but really that initial doctor, he's kind of making the decision for the guy's life. Like he still has a heartbeat and a nervous system and blood flowing through his, where it's a mystery and we can learn from him for sure, but let's keep him alive. Let's save this life if we can. And I don't ever get the message that you just gave me from the book, that he wants to become some sort of an advocate. That would have been different, right? Had they used the circus somehow as a means to demonstrate the anti-warness of it. But this is just like the circus is an avatar for hopelessness. Like I have nothing else in my life, so I think you should make me the freak that I am. That's resignation. That's not advocacy.
I think what's interesting about that is that Trumbo, again, post-Vietnam, chose to kind of shift that. And I wonder if he felt that there already was such anti-war sentiment after Vietnam that he didn't need to make it quite as overt. And instead of focusing on the anti-war, he wanted to focus on the human and show us this is the result of these wars, yet they still deserve our sympathy, and really kind of put us into his headspace. And maybe that was part of his change in the way that he chose to adapt his own work.
That's really interesting, right? That's right. I mean, of course, we're armchair authoring at this point, but Trumbo was a complex guy, and I can absolutely see that.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. What's your sense of Trumbo? Are you have you seen a lot of his works? Did you know he's a Colorado boy?
I did know he was a Colorado boy. Did he grow up next to you? Like, was his? Do you know where his house
Not
was?
with Herc Harvey, we were both born in Montrose, Colorado, though. So we were born in the same place.
That's fantastic. Look at you.
Yeah, I know.
Montrose, classic Colorado Montrose.
And then he was over in Grand Junction is where he went to school. But the big thing is that the three of us, not at the same time, but went to the same college. He went to University of Colorado Boulder and was a reporter at the Boulder Daily Camera. And while we were at school there, the college, because again, he was anti-war, he was somebody who was on the Hollywood 10, and the school decided that they wanted to name the fountain after him while we were in school, and it was a big event, and there was a lot of screenings of his films. There were a lot of people came in to talk, and they got a lot of film students involved to be a part of it. And so we were out there passing out flyers to get people to come to the fountain naming ceremony and everything. Kirk Douglas came out to be a part of it. And so that was, I always think of Trumbo in that aspect now of being a part of that period of college when it was like a whole week of different things going on to celebrate him. So
that's awesome. I remember that too. I remember the whole thing. I didn't know much of Trumbo at the time. I just knew, oh, this is exciting.
Yeah.
Look, it's Kirk Douglas. In terms of what I've seen from Trumbo, I mean, I've seen the big ones, right? Like I've seen Roman Holiday and Spartacus and Exodus, kind of the later stuff. And now Johnny Got His Gun. What else? I mean, The Way We Were, he's credited as additional writing. Saw that one.
Gun Crazy. I brought up Gun Crazy last week, or when we talked about the Honeymoon Killers in our member pre-show chat, as another film about murderous couples. Gun Crazy, he co-wrote that one. Definitely is one worth checking out. And, he's one of these writers because he was on the Hollywood 10 blacklist. There's a whole period in the 50s where he wasn't getting credited for writing, or he had pseudonyms for the work that he did. And again, it was really Spartacus when Kirk Douglas produced that for Kubrick that demanded that his name be credited, and that really is the thing that broke the blacklist. And so that was a pretty important moment for the shifting of his career and getting him back into a place where he could make things in Hollywood again.
Fascinating, right?
Yeah.
Like what a role change. He's got a number of credits around that the writing credits that name him original film writer, which is, to me, it's an interesting credit. Like knowing that there was for example, but here's a strange one. Roman Holiday, 1987, original film writer is obviously Dalton Trumbo. This was, I think, an Italian take on it. Anyway, Papillon, original film writer. He has a credit from 2017. Johnny Got His Gun, the 2008 remake of it with Ben McKenzie, he's just credited as writer. What does that mean, Hollywood?
I mean, I don't know specifically on the on-screen credits, but it's basically that they took his original script and I think in terms of like Papillon or Roman Holiday, the recent remakes, I think because he was credited as story, or maybe they changed it quite a bit in their adaptation, there's just a bit of modification. And so they gave him that credit instead of story by, like the actual 1953 Roman Holiday, story by him, although it was originally uncredited, and then screenplay by. So if they took the story and then just updated it for modern times, then maybe that's why.
Right. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, Trumbo, did you see the Trumbo film with Walter White?
I didn't. I wanted to, and then I heard it was terrible, so I didn't bother. But I'm curious, just because I am still curious about it.
Yeah, me too. I have not seen it either. It does have a fairly favorable score. Bryan Cranston is Dalton Trumbo, big fan of Cranston. So I think it's on my list.
Yeah.
Diane Lane, come on.
Who else in the cast? I mean, we've talked about a number of the people in the cast, but who else stands out for you? We talked about Jason Robards as Dad, Donald Sutherland as Jesus. Kathy Fields played Corrine. She had been in some things, but it looks like she'd only acted in 2 films, The Happy Ending, which is a great little film from 1969, and Johnny Got His Gun. And mostly she worked as a still photographer on sets, which I find interesting, like working as still photographer through the 70s, The Towering Inferno, The Man Who Would Be King, Robin and Marion, Lipstick, Fun with Dick and Jane, Bobby Deerfield, Looking for Mr. Goodbar, The Betsy, and last job as still photographer, Chomps. Oh yeah, Chomps. Do you know? Have you heard of Chomps?
Have I heard of Chomps?
Brian Foster, a young inventor, creates a robotic dog for use as a part of a home protection system. Chomps is an acronym for Canine Home Protection System. Ralph Norton is his boss, with whom he constantly argues. Foster develops a relationship with Norton's daughter, Casey. A rival company wants the dog and sends a few petty criminals to kidnap Chomps. One of Hanna-Barbera's live-action productions. Wow.
Oh, my goodness. No, never heard of it.
Yeah. Valerie Bertinelli.
Oh, well, of course.
Yeah.
Who else? Dalton Trumbo is credited as the orator. Is Dalton Trumbo the guy in the bakery? Who's the orator?
I don't know.
I have this vision of what Dalton Trumbo looks like with the big bushy mustache. It's white. Like I think it is. I think that's him. I think he's the boss with the champagne Merry Christmas.
Now that you say that, it's possible. Yeah, we talking about dream sequences. That is a very strange dream sequence. Like that's a point in the film where it's like going off on a strange little dream tangent. Did you like that dream sequence?
Well, that's why I was laughing at it. Like I think I did, but that's a point in the film where the dreams are getting increasingly surreal. And I think that's what, to me, that represents the fact that his consciousness is becoming much more acute and running into conflict with the limitations of his physical body. That's where those crazy dreams start to erupt. And I think that meant something. It's kind of the same thing we get at the in the third act of All That Jazz, right, where things just unravel, and I couldn't help but thinking about Fosse as I was watching this movie.
That's interesting. Yeah, it was an interesting way to kind of play that, because with the repetitive line from the boss and the manic celebration going on, and in the last act of the film, like we're getting close to that point where we're reaching the climax of the film, and that did feel like internally his memories almost were kind of like there was this kind of this collapsing in on themselves sort of sense about it, or something like just like really losing it and kind of giving up, like this is like there's no sense in remembering this stuff anymore, or something, really,
yeah,
kind of horrifying.
That's a really great way to look at that too, as a metaphor. It's like he's lost so much. He's lost his arms and his legs and his most of his senses, and we also get to watch his kind of emotional well-being peel away, right? His memories peel away. That's rough.
It is rough. It is a very, very tough way to kind of portray that. I was curious if we were going to get any of the bakery scenes, because the book definitely, there's a lot of time spent in the bakery with some of these other characters. Like he meets a Mexican guy named Jose who wants to work in film, and he gets offered an opportunity like to be a PA, and is so afraid to quit his bakery job that the people are trying to help him come up with ways to quit the bakery job. Like there's a lot of time spent on that in the book. And it's interesting because it's like, it was such a strange little element of the story, and I wasn't exactly sure where we were going, but it really painted a picture of that world quite well. And so it's interesting. It's interesting.
It's pretty efficient. I didn't know he was in a bakery until we get that shot of him backing through the baguettes.
Yeah.
It's interesting to hear that there's such a big part of bakery in the book, because bakery did not seem important in the movie.
Yeah, but clearly in his life before the war, it played a big part of kind of figuring himself out. Diane Varsi is our young nurse who figures everything out. She was in Compulsion, one of our films that we talked about ages ago.
Imagine that.
Yeah. She was Oscar nominated for her role in Peyton Place, which is where she kind of started getting more and more jobs and worked through the 50s, 60s, and 70s. I liked her here. I thought she was great as the nurse. She really carried that pathos that we needed for somebody like her.
Well, I agree. I thought she was great. She also, like, it's a vastly more sort of emotionally complicated portrayal because I'm getting hints of, like, I'm falling in love with this guy. I'm obsessed with this guy. I also have a striking resemblance to Kathy Fields. And so there's a bit of transference going on, but it's only really for us, the audience, until she starts touching him on his skin and he starts putting pictures to what she must look like. And I thought that was really great. And she's much more interesting when she's not speaking and when she's like drawing on his chest than when she becomes the subservient nurse to the soldier doctors, right? She shows her place more than not.
Well, and I think that just speaks to the realities of this world, which is so frustrating because she has figured out so much about this guy. She wants to help him. She's the one who clamps his breathing tube, and everything is just like shut down so instantly by her boss. And I think that's the real tragedy.
What do you make of that? Because you said that was a thing that that she did in the movie that was different than the book.
Yeah, right. I liked it, and I think it was helpful in the film because, again, as the audience, we're actually in the room and we have that relationship that she has with him. And so I think it gives us a chance to feel like there are people who want to help. Like, I don't think that would have been as easy to portray in the book, but by having it in the film, I think that it gave us a little more to that climactic final moment. So I liked that he had that. It was pretty powerful.
Yeah, me too.
Cinematography, we've talked about the black and white versus the color. Any other thoughts with how the film looks?
Well, I do love the black and white versus the color. For me, that's integrated really nicely. The fact that the color represents his mind's eye. I thought that was a nice touch. And the black and white is much more bleak, in the movie, and especially the harsh tones of the highs when the shutters are open and the sun hits his skin. It's almost blinding to us as an audience, just as it would be to him if he could see it. So I really liked those touches. I thought the film generally looked great. I didn't have, nothing stood out to me as particularly boring, right? I was interested in just about everything I was watching.
I was impressed with how Trumbo captured it in the black and white and color. And particularly, there was a shot where we are with him in black and white, and we're kind of on the back end of him. So he's got the big drape right in front of us, but it's black and white. And then suddenly the camera kind of moves up and forward, and Timothy Bottoms sits up, and it shifts to color. And it's like, what a fascinating way to kind of give us that break of the reality and then suddenly being thrust into his internal world. Like, it was
totally
so smartly done. I was impressed with how Trumbo chose to do that.
Yeah, me too. Nice touch.
I will just call out one of the 10 J's composed the music. Jerry Fielding did the music for this, and I really like it. It starts off kind of with that military drum line sort of music that works exceptionally, especially with that opening, which was a great addition to this film. Obviously, we couldn't have had that in the book, but like all those images of military, of soldiers in line, like all of that stuff really kind of setting us up for the world that we're in before suddenly we get that whistle of the bomb that goes on very, very long, leading to that final explosion that puts us into the hospital. It was just great. And I loved the way the music played over the course of the film.
I don't think we haven't talked about Jerry Fielding much. I think we've done a couple, right? We've done Josie Wales. Yeah.
I don't think he's come up a whole heck of a lot, but I always enjoy his stuff.
For being one of the 10.
Yeah.
It just seems like we probably need some more.
I mean, so many scores in the 70s that work well for stuff that he's done. Wild Bunch we talked about on a member bonus episode. I think that's the most recent conversation. So
I think, did we get Straw Dogs on the list for this year?
Nope.
Can't remember. We've talked about it, but anyway.
Not yet. Not yet.
Anything else?
Just that, this might speak to the dream sequences. When Trumbo first decided to adapt this, he wrote it with Luis Buñuel, which I think
there's your circus, everybody.
I think that exactly speaks to some of those dream sequences. They never could get that one financed, and so this was a few years later. He was working with producer Bruce Campbell, not that Bruce Campbell, but this is the hey, it's Fat Albert Bruce Campbell. They teamed up and ended up making this film, getting the money and everything. So, and then not a huge release. They had a little bit of a release, but what I liked about it is that all servicemen could go see it for free.
Oh, that's weird. I'm going to make a movie about like the hardest part of being a soldier and a potential future for you, and you can see it for free. Come on in.
Well, what's interesting about that is the book was actually, there was a period where it was incredibly popular for soldiers when they were reading it out in the field. And so I think there's an element of having a story like this for soldiers that felt like somebody saw them,
Yeah, I get that.
Because I think often they feel like they're just a cog in the machine.
Pretty good.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, well, I think that's it. So we'll be right back, but first, the credits.
The Next Reel is a production of True Story FM, engineering by Andy Nelson, music by Pyotr Hummel, Yuri Leontiev, Balloon Planet, Oriole Novella, and Eli Catlin. Andy usually finds all the stats for the awards and numbers at the-numbers.com, boxofficemojo.com, imdb.com, and wikipedia.org. Find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, please consider doing that for our show.
As a film fan, you know the power of cinema to connect us, to inspire us, and to help us make sense of the world around us. And while there are great communities of movie lovers out there online, it can sometimes feel like you're alone in your passion when you're out there in the real world, like there's no way to identify your fellow film buffs among the crowd. But what if there was a way to signal your love of cinema to the world around you? A way to act as a beacon for other film fans, inviting them to connect with you over your shared passion. That's where the Next Reel merch store comes in. When you're wearing a Next Reel design, you're not just showing off your great taste in movies, you're identifying yourself as a member of a community of film lovers who understand the power of movies to bring us together. You're inviting other fans to approach you, to strike up a conversation about the films you love, and to forge new connections over your shared enthusiasm for the art form. And with our wide variety of designs, there's something in our store for every kind of film fan. Maybe you're repping a classic like A Streetcar Named Desire, a comedy like National Lampoon's European Vacation, or maybe you're sporting a design from a more modern masterpiece like Fast Times at Ridgemont High or Relic. Or maybe you're just looking to show your love of the Next Reel with our classic logo design. Whatever your taste, we've got you covered. And if you're a diehard fan of a particular filmmaker, check out our new Filmmakers Filmography series, featuring designs that showcase the complete works of some of cinema's greatest artists. From Akira Kurosawa to Stanley Kubrick, John Carpenter to Sergio Leone. These designs are a great way to spark conversations with other fans and pay tribute to the artists who have shaped the course of cinema history. But the best part? You can get these designs on more than just t-shirts. We've got mugs, stickers, and all sorts of other gear to help you rep your love of the movies in your everyday life. So whether you're sipping your morning coffee or decorating your laptop, you can show off your great taste in films and connect with other fans wherever you go. And no matter which design or product you choose, when you wear Next Reel merch, you're not just wearing a piece of clothing or using a cool accessory. You're wearing a conversation starter. You're inviting other film fans to approach you, to geek out over your favorite movies, and to become a part of the vibrant, passionate community of cinema lovers that the Next Reel has helped to build. So if you're looking for a way to express your love of the movies and connect with other film fans in the real world, head to thenextreel.com/merch and grab some gear today. Every purchase helps us keep the mics hot for our weekly movie chats, and every time you wear your Next Reel gear, you're helping to spread the love of cinema far and wide. Thanks for being part of the Next Reel community. We couldn't do it without you, and we're so grateful to have you along for the ride as we continue to explore the endlessly fascinating world of film. So wear your love of the movies with pride and get ready to connect with your fellow film fans like never before.
Sequels and remakes, Andy, seems like a long list.
Well, there's been a few. I mean, the book, written in the 30s, so plenty of time. First, there was a radio adaptation of it in March 1940 with James Cagney playing Joe Bonham. Donald Sutherland actually read a passage from the novel in the 1972 anti-Vietnam War documentary FTA, later re-edited into the 2005 documentary Sir, No Sir. In 1982, it was adapted into a stage play by Bradley Rand Smith, which has been performed worldwide. The first time it ran off-Broadway was with Jeff Daniels playing the role, and he won an Obie Award for that. Then there was a TV adaptation in 1984 for, I think it was Czech TV. And then the big one, though, is 1988. Metallica. This, I know, it's a strange thing, but
the big one, yeah.
This is the big one. Metallica released the song One, and in their video, they had clips of the film. And this is where I first actually saw any clips of this. I remember the video. Eventually, the Metallica ended up buying the rights to the film so that they could use the music video without having to pay additional royalty fees. I think that is so fascinating that Metallica has the rights to Johnny God's Gun.
That is crazy. That is punk rock. And Metallica isn't even a punk band. That's so crazy. So do they still own the rights?
From my understanding.
They must still, right?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
2008, you already mentioned it, but Benjamin Mackenzie performed Joe Bonham in the Live on Stage on Film version, which was the play. That particular version, Mackenzie released it as kind of an educational movie that was basically available to every high school in the United States, has pre and post discussions for students, all sorts of stuff. So that's one that maybe more students have seen now, that version. Last but not least, 2014, they premiered it on the UK stage, and Jack Holden was playing Joe Bonham in that one. So, yeah.
Interesting. With all this attention, how to do it award season?
It did okay for itself. At the Cannes Film Festival, it ended up tying the grand prize of the jury with the film taking off. It also won the Fipresci Prize, which is the International Film Journalists voting on that one. And it was nominated for the Palme d'Or, but lost to The Go-Between. At the Golden Globes, Timothy Bottoms was nominated for Most Promising Newcomer, but lost to Desi Arnaz Jr. in Red Sky at Morning. At the WGA, it was nominated for Best Drama Adaptation from Another Medium, but lost to The French Connection. At the Kinema Junpo Awards, which is a Japanese film magazine, it won the Reader's Choice Award for Best Foreign Film. And last but not least, at the Atlanta International Film Festival, it won the Golden Phoenix Award for Best of Festival.
All right. So it did okay.
Not too bad. Not too bad.
Not too bad. Hard movie. A lot of people struggling, I'm sure, to watch the film.
Yeah.
And that's why they couldn't finish it, so they couldn't give it enough awards.
And I'm curious if the Hollywood elite, where they stood with Dalton Trumbo, with some of the messaging that it had, if that's why it didn't have as much notice there.
Interesting. How did it do at the box office? Did Trumbo get any money?
Well, for Trumbo's adaptation of his own novel, he had a budget of about a little over $1 million. The producer and Trumbo invested $80,000 and attracted 25 investors to invest $600,000 in the film. The total cash outlay for the film was $750,000, but deferred technical fees apparently put it over $1 million. I'm not exactly sure how much, so for our sake, I'm just going to say $1 million, which is $7.8 million in today's dollars. The movie opened August 4th, 1971, the same weekend as Ted Kotcheff's Aussie thriller, Wake in Fright. As far as how much it made, this is also tricky because it either made $770,000 in domestic theatrical rentals or $1 million. One or the other. I don't know. For our sake, I'm just going to go with $1 million. And that means, Pete, you had just called this out the other day, or a few weeks ago in our shows. That means that this film's available estimate shows it to break exactly even. Though with that plus in there, it likely had a little bit of an adjusted loss per finished minute.
Outstanding, though. I'm okay with it just being right at zero. That's perfect.
I knew you'd be thrilled by that.
Oh, thrilled. That's spreadsheet thrilling right there. I'm glad we watched this movie. I really am. And never going to watch it again. It's a hard watch for me. It's like triggering in all of the worst, most anxious ways for me. But I'm really glad we watched it because it's a film deserving of attention.
I'd be curious how you would feel about the book. Like, did you ever read The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, or you only saw the movie version of it?
Yes. I did read The Diving Bell after we watched it.
Did you have the same reaction with that book?
Yeah.
Okay. So then maybe...
Yeah, it's terrible. I don't know why I watched. I don't know why I read it. I could have stopped.
Maybe don't read this. Because it's definitely all internal.
Yeah.
It's definitely him trying to figure all that stuff out. So maybe don't.
I don't like being in my own head for too long. Why would I like being in someone else's?
Well, I loved it. I had a great time with it. I did struggle with some of the way that the dream sequences were portrayed, but for the most part, this worked very well for me. So I'm definitely glad to have had it on the list as well.
Awesome.
All right, well, we will be right back for our ratings, but first, here is the trailer for next week's movie, Bruce Lee's The Way of the Dragon.
Hello.
Here I stand, a lonesome soldier, amidst the chaos of war. The bullets whiz by, the bombs explode, and yet the greatest battle I face is the one within my own mind. Oh, the loneliness! It's like a giant, invisible rat, gnawing about and mocking me. Oh, look at you, all alone in this grand adventure of warfare. I long for the companionship of my fellow soldiers, but alas, they are all busy fighting their own battles. Clang, clang, take that, you noxious nemesis. But here I am, left to my own devices, with nothing but my trusty rifle and a can of Spam for company. Ah, Spam, my faithful friend in these trying times. But wait, perhaps the loneliness is a blessing in disguise. Perhaps it shall make me stronger, like a mighty oak tree standing tall in the midst of a hurricane. Alas, probably not. Onward, soldier, for loneliness is no ally in this grand battle of life. Wait a second. You don't have to fight the good fight all alone. No, sir. Just head over to thenextreel.com and join the community supporting the Next Reel family of film podcasts. Get bonus episodes and content, early access, a standing invitation to join the live stream chats as we record, ad-free versions of the shows, and access to the super secret channels in our Discord community. Mostly, though, you'll know you're supporting our shows and the team that keeps them coming every week and has done since 2011. Thank you for your support. Back to the show. Letterboxd, Andy, letterboxd.com/thenextreel. That's where you can find our HQ page. What are you going to do with this movie? Is it 5 stars and a it's going to make a joke that's inappropriate. Is it 5 stars and a heart for you? Is that where you're going? Is it that good?
You know, I felt bogged down by some of the dream sequences, and I think that maybe on a watch where I wasn't watching it so close to having finished the book, I wouldn't feel as thrown by those, but this, I was thrown a little bit by them, and on this watch. And so I think I'm going to say 4 stars and a heart. I feel like that's where I'm going to go with this one.
Me too. It's exactly where I'm going to go with it.
Oh, look at that.
Yep, for sure. And, you know, I can't remember even what I did for Diving Bell and the Butterfly. Maybe 1 star and half a heart because I was so moved by it. But I do think that's a better movie in terms of the experience inside his head. But this was great. This was a great experience.
Yeah, and it's definitely one that's worth looking at. And to our point, it doesn't necessarily feel as anti-war as perhaps the book does. It does feel like there's this pro-life sort of story and this element of acknowledging that this person has rights too. And I think that was a pretty powerful part. So yeah, I'm really glad to have watched it.
Me too.
Well, you can find me over on Letterboxd at Soda Creek Film. You can find Pete at Pete Wright, and you can find the show at The Next Reel. So what did you think about Johnny Got His Gun? We would love to hear your thoughts. Hop into the Show Talk channel over at our Discord community where we will be talking about the movie this week.
When the movie ends,
our conversation begins. we didn't even talk about the title, the fact that it's a play off of Johnny Get Your Gun from the song.
Yeah. Over there. Yeah. Idiots. We're a bunch of idiots.
What kind of, yeah. Let's start over.
Letterboxd giveth, Andrew.
As Letterboxd always doeth.
What'd you do? How did you find your review today?
I did review activity and stayed on the high end.
I did too.
High meaning star end.
Oh, high meaning star end. I went straight to the middle of the road only because I like the first line the most.
Oh, okay.
I think it covers the movie. I think you could have given it more stars for this line. It's from Raphael Parker Jovine. This is a weird-ass movie with a weird-ass legacy and a weird-ass tone and some weird-ass performances. Basically, you have a movie directed by then-communist pariah Dalton Trumbo, Spartacus Exodus, with an uncredited contribution by Luis Buñuel. This anti-war script resembles a cross between The Diving Bell and The Butterfly, Seconds, a Terry Gilliam film, and The Ninth Configuration. Our protagonist's performance is not so terrible as it is bizarre, mostly due to the dialogue. Its cinematography is fantastic, bringing out all the psychological horror as well as the surreal. All in all, the film has some interesting ideas that are mostly executed very well, but there are so many of them that the film ends up feeling overwhelming. For a 100-minute film, it feels like 3 hours long. The film is worth seeing for curiosity's sake and to see what was so intriguing in it that Metallica used footage on their iconic video for one and bought the rights to the film. From Raphael Parker Jovine, 3 stars and a heart.
The comparison or bringing up Diving Bell and the Butterfly, Seconds, Terry Gilliam film, and The Ninth Configuration, that is a strong way to describe this.
Absolutely. I just like that it's 3 specific movies and a Terry Gilliam film.
Yeah. Well, we all know what that means. So
yeah, we get it. Yeah. What do you got?
Well, I went with Lorenzo Ladogana's 4.5-star review that says, I feel the urge to brush up my Morse code knowledge. Nightmare. An absolutely effing horrifying, exquisite, hilarious, and helpless nightmare. Yeah.
Yeah. It does make you, these kinds of movies are like, oh, maybe I should just know Morse code, because you never know. You never know.
Just have it in your back pocket. Right. The only thing I know is SOS. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It's terrifying to not know. So I guess I could say, ooh, or I could say,
and so.
Right.
Thanks, Letterboxd.